Detroit, 1943. The air shakes with a metallic howl that will soon echo across every Allied front. While history celebrates weapons and generals, few know it was America's noisiest engine, the legendary Screaming Jimmy, that won the quiet war of logistics, powering the trucks, boats, and generators that made victory possible. But how did an ear-splitting machine become the unsung hero of silence? And why does its scream still haunt the world that tried to silence it? Ernest Chatterton stood over blueprints in the winter of 1946, sketching a shape no one in British engineering had ever attempted for a diesel. 3 banks of cylinders, each forming a corner of a perfect triangle, with crankshafts at every point. Inside each of the 6 long cylinders, 2 pistons faced one another, 18 pistons in all, sharing just 6 combustion chambers. When the Deltic engine ran, pistons rushed toward each other in pairs, compressing air and fuel until they met in the middle, then recoiling as the explosion forced them apart. Each movement drove a crankshaft at the triangle's edge, the whole engine a geometric dance of steel and fire. The secret behind this design was kinematics, how to turn the straight-line force of opposed pistons into smooth, circular motion. Gears at each corner meshed the 3 crankshafts together, keeping them precisely in phase. This meant the engine could be far shorter and lighter than any rival, yet deliver power from every cylinder on every revolution. With a roots blower forcing air through the block, spent exhaust was scavenged instantly, making the Deltic a true 2-stroke. 1 power pulse for every turn of the crank, no wasted motion. The result was a compact engine that delivered up to 2,500 horsepower from a package barely the size of a family hatchback. Its specific power, over 110 horsepower per liter in early tests, climbing to 145 in later versions, set records that would stand for years. Chatterton's triangular layout wasn't just a technical curiosity, it was a breakthrough in power density. 18 pistons, 6 combustion chambers, 3 crankshafts, all synchronized in a closed loop. The Deltic's geometry solved the weight and space problems that had stymied earlier marine diesels, making it possible to fit enormous power into the hull of a patrol boat or the frame of a locomotive. In the test cell at Acton, when the prototype finally fired, the windows rattled and the engineers realized they had built something entirely new, a machine that was as much mathematics as metal. At Acton, the prototype sat on its test stand, a tangle of pipes and polished aluminum, still warm from assembly. The air inside the cell was thick with the bite of diesel, the sharp tang of coolant, and the nervous energy of a dozen engineers and fitters. If you're enjoying what you've seen so far, I hope you'll consider subscribing. It helps me preserve the history of these remarkable machines for future generations. Now, let's continue. Some had served in wartime plants. Others were new, drawn from every corner of post-war London, men and women, veterans and apprentices, all waiting for the first ignition. A hush fell as the lead mechanic turned the starter. The engine coughed, then roared awake, filling the room with a sound that was less a hum than a shriek. Metal vibrated underfoot. Dials on the test panel spun as the tachometer swept past 2,000 RPM. At full throttle, the Deltic's 18 pistons and 3 crankshafts blurred into a single furious motion. The whine was so sharp it seemed to cut through the concrete walls, rattling bolts loose and sending a shiver up every spine. Workers in distant offices paused, unsure if it was thunder or the birth of something new. The test crew shouted to one another over the noise, checking for leaks and watching for smoke. Heat shimmered off the block, rising in waves. The engine climbed to 2,500 RPM, holding steady at a power output that, on paper, reached 2,500 horsepower. Unthinkable for an engine barely longer than a dining table. The sound was not just loud, it was alive, a mechanical wail that announced its presence to the entire factory. For an hour, the prototype ran under load, the floor trembling with each pulse. When the throttle finally eased, ears rang and hands shook. Oil mist hung in the air, settling on overalls and steel tools. The silence afterward felt almost sacred. Admiralty inspectors, who had doubted the design, nodded in grudging respect. The Deltic had survived its trial by fire. Its birth cry, the scream of synchronized pistons and forced air, became its signature, echoing through Acton and out into the world. In that moment, the workforce knew they had built an engine that would not only serve, but to define a new era of power. 3 Deltic engines thundered beneath the deck of a dark-class patrol boat, each one a triangular hive of pistons and gears, driving the propellers with a combined force of over 7,000 horsepower. In the dead of night, Royal Navy crews stood at their stations, eyes fixed on instruments, as the hull sliced through the channel at speeds approaching 50 knots. The acceleration pressed men back against their seats. The sound was a shrill mechanical howl, so loud it rattled the bulkheads and vibrated through every steel plate. Patrol logs from 1955 record these boats outrunning anything else on the water. On one exercise, Darkbiter surged from a standing start to full speed in under 2 minutes, leaving a churning wake and a wall of spray that lingered long after she was gone. The Deltic engine's high power-to-weight ratio let the boats turn sharply, darting between headlands and doubling back on enemy contacts in seconds. In pursuit or retreat, the only thing faster was the echo of their engines bouncing off the cliffs. Crews quickly learned that reliability mattered as much as speed. Salt water found its way into every compartment, but the Deltic's modular design meant a damage blower or injector could be swapped out while the other engines kept running. Maintenance teams worked in cramped engine rooms, hands slick with oil, replacing filters and tightening bolts as the deck pitched beneath them. The engine's triple redundancy meant a patrol could limp home even if one unit failed, a lesson learned the hard way during North Sea storms, when a sudden loss of power could mean disaster. With every mission, the Deltic's reputation grew. Skippers joked that the only warning an intruder would get was the rising pitch of the engines as the patrol boat closed in. The sound became a signature of British coastal defense, a mechanical banshee that signaled both speed and resolve. For the Royal Navy, the Deltic was more than an engine. It was an answer to a world where the threat could come at any hour, and only those who moved fastest would prevail. On the rails, the Deltic engine found its second stage, this time not in the shadows of military patrols, but roaring across the British countryside in full daylight. By 1961, British Rail had installed twin Deltic engines into the new Class 55 locomotives, each machine packing 3,300 horsepower and capable of sustaining speeds over 100 miles per hour. These weren't experimental records. They were daily reality on the East Coast Main Line. The express from London to Edinburgh, once a slow crawl behind steam, became a 6-hour sprint. On a clear July morning, D9008, the Green Howards, left King's Cross, hauling 14 coaches packed with passengers. The timetable called for 6 hours and 40 minutes, but the Deltic did it in 5 hours and 29 minutes, never once dropping below 60 miles per hour. Drivers described the sensation as flying on rails, a constant surge of power, the engine's high-pitched whine echoing off station canopies as the countryside blurred past. Inside the cab, the controls vibrated with mechanical energy. A veteran driver, Bill McKean, recalled how the throttle responded instantly, the locomotive leaping forward with every notch. He learned to listen for the faintest change in the Deltic's song. A slight drop in pitch meant it was time to check the injectors or balance the blower. Maintenance crews at Finsbury Park could swap out an entire power unit in a single shift, thanks to the modular design. But keeping the Deltics in top form was no small task. Oil mist coated the engine room, and the constant high revving meant bearings and gaskets needed regular attention. Still, the reward was speed and spectacle. Crowds gathered on platforms just to watch a Deltic streak past, its exhaust trailing and its sound carrying for miles. For a generation, these locomotives were the public face of British engineering, military technology repurposed for peace, carrying the nation forward not with silence, but with a jubilant mechanical roar. Inside the depot, the Deltic's promise of power came with a cost measured in sweat and hours. Senior fitters like Tom Bailey spent nights hunched over the triangular mass, hands blackened with oil, eyes stinging from fumes that clung to every surface. Routine servicing meant wrestling with special alignment jigs, calibrating 3 crankshafts. So precisely that a missed tooth could turn a symphony of motion into a cacophony of metal. The opposed piston design, so brilliant on paper, demanded tools found nowhere else in the shed: precision gauges, custom pullers, and torque bars as long as a man's arm. Each overhaul was a battle against complexity: 6-cylinder covers, 18 pistons, and a tangle of gears that had to be coaxed back into perfect sync. Bailey remembered engines that ran hard through salt spray, only to come home leaking oil from every seam. A single blown gasket could mean hours of stripping and resealing, sometimes with spares that arrived late or not at all. Unlike the old English electrics, there was no quick fix. Every job required patience, steady hands, and nerves strong enough to trust the measurements. Depot logs filled with notes on vibration checks and bearing swaps, each entry a testament to the hours spent keeping the Deltic's howl alive. The fitter's pride was real, but so was the fatigue. As parts wore out and skilled hands retired, the cost of keeping these engines in service rose year by year. A burden measured not just in pounds, but in the quiet resignation of those who kept the triangle turning. In the late 1970s, the boardrooms of British Rail and the Ministry of Transport filled with memos and financial charts instead of the sounds of engines. Policy analysts reviewed maintenance logs and cost projections, highlighting the growing expense of keeping Deltic locomotives in service. Each overhaul required specialized skills and custom parts, both increasingly scarce as experienced fitters retired and suppliers closed shop. The Deltic's modular design, once its strength, became a logistical headache: warehouses filled with unique components that no other engine could use. Standardization became the new doctrine. Internal reports from 1979 called for a shift to engines that shared parts across the fleet, reducing storage costs and simplifying training. Diesel-electric locomotives from Sulzer and English Electric, with their slower-turning 4-stroke engines, promised longer intervals between overhauls and lower fuel bills. The Deltic's appetite for oil and its tendency to leak under heavy loads drew criticism from auditors and planners tasked with cutting costs. By 1981, a central parts warehouse at Stratford shut its doors. The shelves emptied and the last Deltic spares shipped out. Fleet managers ordered the withdrawal of the oldest Class 55s, citing unsustainable cost per mile and the lack of new recruits trained for the complex triangular engines. Defense planners, too, favored gas turbines and standardized diesels for new patrol craft, leaving the Deltic's era behind. The decision to retreat from complexity was written not in the engine shed, but in policy papers and ministerial briefings. An institutional pivot that left a culture of mechanical pride facing extinction. In a railway shed tucked behind rows of suburban houses, a team of volunteers gathers around a machine that once ruled the rails. The lead restorer, hands stained with oil and eyes bright with pride, checks the alignment of the triangular engine at the heart of their project. A Deltic rescued from the scrapyard, now gleaming under fluorescent lights. Every weekend, they coax life from a design most railways abandoned decades ago, fabricating gaskets from scratch and machining new gears. On lathes older than the youngest members of the crew, some parts are impossible to find, so they swap tips with other groups, trading drawings and stories like currency. When the engine finally fires, the howl fills the workshop, rattling toolboxes and drawing a crowd from the car park. Children cover their ears, but the old drivers grin, recognizing the sound that once meant speed and power. After months of work, the charter train is ready. The Deltic hauls a rake of vintage coaches up the main line, its certificate for heritage operation freshly stamped. Mile after mile, the engine's whine bounces off cuttings and bridges, a living memory in steel and noise. Passengers lean out of windows, waving to line-side photographers who have waited hours just to catch a glimpse and a recording of that unmistakable sound. In these moments, the machine is more than a relic. It's proof that the skills, stories, and spirit of a vanished era can still be kept alive, not in museums, but on the rails themselves. Somewhere in the digital world, the Deltic's shriek lives on, not as a memory, but as a living presence. Online forums fill with stories from engineers and fans, each describing the first time they heard that mechanical wail echo across a platform or through the mist on the channel. YouTube videos of restored Deltics firing up have drawn millions of views. Viewers from every continent waiting for the moment when the engine coughs, then howls, and the comments fill with stories from people who rode behind them or kept them running. Virtual reality simulators let new generations drive a Class 55 or stand in a patrol boat's engine room, headphones shaking with the same sound that once rattled steel and bone. In these spaces, the Deltic is more than a machine. It's a symbol of untimely genius, a solution built for a world that only briefly needed it. The shape, the sound, the sheer audacity of the design inspire a kind of loyalty that transcends practicality. Owners and restorers swap advice on balancing crankshafts and chasing rare parts, while digital artists recreate every bolt and gasket in pixel-perfect detail. The engine's story has become a kind of folklore, a reminder that sometimes brilliance arrives before the world is ready to hold on to it. When a Deltic starts, whether in a shed or through a screen, it's a challenge to the silence of modernity, a mechanical roar that refuses to fade, even when the world around it has grown quiet. In 1943, Detroit Diesel produced nearly 58,000 engines, each built to a design that redefined what mobile power could achieve. The Series 71's two-stroke cycle, modular layout, and signature whine became the mechanical backbone of Allied logistics, powering DUKW's landing craft and field generators from Normandy to the Pacific. Documents show that this reliability was no accident. Charles Kettering's vision for a simple, serviceable engine shaped a tool that anyone could repair under fire. Yet some technical details, like wartime field modifications and specific deployment logs, remain sealed in military archives or lost to time. Today, the Detroit Diesel two-stroke endures in restored machines and remote work sites, not as nostalgia, but as evidence of engineering that outlasted its era. The record is clear. The sound that once meant rescue or victory is still heard, proving that even in the age of silence, the world was built on engines that made themselves impossible to ignore. Thank you for watching. If you had the chance to work on one of these, or if you remember hearing that distinctive sound, I'd be genuinely interested to hear your story in the comments. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, please do subscribe. There's much more to come.